Good morning, everyone. I am very happy and thankful for being here once again with you all. So may the good spirits help me to share with you what I have studied about the topic, Blessed are the poor in spirit. So, Blessed are the poor in spirit is the title of chapter 7 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. And preparing myself for this lecture has been a very intense experience. The real topic today is humility, as we'll see later. When we study about humility, we realize that this is a very hard virtue to be practiced or pursued by us due to our current stage of spiritual evolution. And to achieve it, we first have to win the battle against pride and egoism. So, blessed are the poor in spirit is one of the Christ's Beatitudes, or in Portuguese, bem-aventuranças. The Beatitudes were listed by Jesus during the Sermon of the Mount, which is a very important and meaningful sermon registered in the book of Matthew, chapters 5 to 7, and in Luke, chapter 6. The book of Matthew narrates the sermon with more details. So, according to Matthew, on the day of the sermon, Jesus was surrounded by many people, and most of them were struggling in life. And he started this sermon with the famous eight Beatitudes that are listed here in the right and the left side of my slide. So the first one, which is the topic today, is blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and so go on. So the Beatitudes are so profound that there are 5 chapters in the Gospel according to Spiritism, detailing some of them. It is important to be said that during the Sermon of the Mount, Jesus taught his followers the Lord's Prayer for the first time. So going to the topic, the expression poor in spirit can bring some difficulty in interpreting it at first, because we usually use this expression in a pejorative way. Some people use it to diminish people. And by saying this, poor in spirit, Jesus meant those who are humble in spirit or poor in pride. Actually, the idea that the realm of God is open to the poor, oppressed, or those who suffer appears at least 60 times in the Bible. This reinforces the importance of developing the virtue humility within us. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 2, we read, all these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But this is the one to whom I'll look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. So here we see the mention humble and spirit, but there is the word contrite, which is contrito in Portuguese, and the meaning for this word is crushed, crippled, or are broken, so the broken in spirit. So we are right now in a world of tests and atonement. And it is easier for us, due to our stage of evolution, it is easier to be humble when we suffer. So when we suffer, our ego diminishes And then there is something in us that can shine. We accept God better. So when we suffer, we open our hearts to God in our stage of evolution. Usually, those who have the means to a comfortable life usually declare themselves as self-sufficient, and they close their hearts to God. So this idea that I just said is reinforced when we see what happened on the days before the Sermon of the Mount. The book Boa Nova by Humberto de Campos, psychographed by Chico Xavier, has a chapter about the Sermon of the Mount. And Humberto de Campos narrates a conversation that happened before the sermon between Jesus, Andrew, and Levi. Just for curiosity, Levi was a tax collector who later became the Apostle Matthew. In the conversation, Levi tells Jesus that some days ago, 3 men came to his house looking after information about the realm of God. One of the men was crippled, another one was abandoned by his family due to severe accusations, and the third one was going through a very bad moment in his life. These men are considered losers by our society asked Levi what they could do to contribute to the realm of God. And Levi, in a rude manner, told them that they could do nothing because they had nothing to offer. But later on, Levi uh, thought about some of the Jesus' preaches, and he realized that he might have made a mistake. So on that day that Jesus was at his house, he asks Jesus, what would the gospel reach with these disabled and beggars? And yes, Levi, you made a mistake. And Jesus says, we need to love and accept the precious collaboration of those defeated by the world. If the gospel is the good news, I'm translating Boa Nova as good news. I don't know if it is the right expression. So here, if the gospel is the good news, how can it not be the divine message for the sad and disinherited in the immense human family? Those fortunate on earth do not need the good news. In the feats of luck, creatures hear the voice of God louder. So we see here that Jesus had a strategy. He knew that his time in his planet was going to be short. So he prioritized to preach for those who were open to his ideas, or the humble ones. Those who were suffering had their ego, as I said before, diminished and were open to God. They needed consolation, they needed love. So Jesus' seed was going to grow faster in those hearts. Because of that, he started the Sermon of the Mount on the following day with the Beatitudes. So he was saying, welcome you all who are suffering, who are facing a hard time in life. So he was welcoming the ones who were suffering. So going on, searching for the oppressed, the afflicted, and the slandered, we feel them so connected to heaven in their hopes that we recognize that they reveal a sublime reflection of the presence of our Father in their spirits. Have you observed any fortunate person in the world with a higher concern other than that of defending the fruit of his material victory? So he knew it would take him a long time to convince or to seed his gospel in the hearts of the fortunate ones, in the hearts of the powerful ones. And even if he reached this goal, He knew that the powerful ones would try to implement the gospel by force and not by love, as we saw happening during the Middle Age. So going back to the chapter 7 of the gospel, in the beginning of the chapter, Kardec reinforces what we just saw, saying that by poor in spirit, Jesus meant the humble spirits, those who recognize their own spiritual poverty or their need for God. Kardec says that in our society, people of knowledge usually hold high opinions about themselves. They usually consider themselves superior to others and sometimes even superior to the divine. Since they concentrate all their attention upon themselves, they are unable to lift up their eyes to God. So why does this happen? How do we become so full of ourselves when we have something, when we have a gift, when we have like material things? And this happens because through reincarnation, we are ascending this staircase. And we are, here is the world of tests and atonements, and we are closer to a primitive world than we are from one of the pure energy. And in a primitive world, our instinct of conservation was used to keep us alive. And pride and egoism are consequences of this instinct, the instinct of conservation. But through pride and egoism, our instinct of conservation prevents the development of humility in our hearts. There is a lecture in a lecture, Susana Simões says that there are two moments here. In the material world, there is a relation between the creature with itself. And here, in the second moment, the relation is between the creature with God. It is where the pure hearts are. So what can we ascend that scale? Like us here, like a regular person who has a shelter, the comfort of our homes, like internet connection, food on our tables, some of us like good health. Since we are transitioning to a world of regeneration, how can we fight against our primitive instincts? What is the key? And the answer is know thyself, as you all might know. So let's learn and reflect a little bit. This is the mind system according to Freud. So in Freud's system, the mind is divided into three parts: the id, ego, and superego. I like this iceberg picture we can see here, the three parts, and we can notice that our minds are mostly unconscious. So the id here is the primitive and instinctive component of personality. The id is the impulsive and unconscious part of our psyche, which responds directly and immediately to basic urges, needs, and desires. The id operates on the pleasure principle. So when the id achieves its demands, we experience pleasure. When it is denied, we experience tension and pleasure. So the id is primitive, illogical, irrational, and fantasy-oriented. It is selfish and wishful in nature. Now, the ego. The ego develops to mediate between the id and the external real world. So the ego operates according to the reality principle, working out ways to satisfy its demands. It is the decision-making component of personality. Often the ego is weak when compared to the headstrong id. The superego, the third part, is mostly unconscious. Its function is to control its impulses, and it also tries to persuade the ego to consider moralistic values. The superego consists of two systems, the conscience and the ideal self. The conscience can punish the ego through causing feelings of guilt. And the ideal self is an imaginary picture of ourselves on how we ought to be. So the best picture, like represents career aspirations, how we have to behave as a member of society. Now, seeing Jung's model, it is an improvement of the Freudian model. And we can see here in this picture that Jung added more components to the model. So we can see the four major archetypes, which is persona, ego, shadow, animus, anima. And also there is the inclusion, which is something new, and it is quite discussed, the inclusion of the collective unconscious, which is the part of the psyche, served as a form of psychological inheritance. It contains all the knowledge and experiences that humans share as a species. So as the Freudian model, the ego is the center of consciousness. The id is here in the shadow, so we see a relation between the shadow, the id, shadow with the ego, and the self is the center of the total personality. It kind of relates to the superego thing. I started with Freud because there are only three components, so I thought it was going to be easier to understand at first. So the self is kind of the superego, but it is the center of total personality, which includes consciousness, unconscious, and the ego. The self is both the whole and the center. This model is the one which is most used currently. It is even used by Joana de Angelis. Some more definitions. According to the dictionaries, ego is a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. Synonyms for ego are pride, pridefulness, self-esteem, self-regard, self-respect. So, Joana de Angelis, in the book Momentos de Meditação, Moments of Meditation, says that your internal enemies and friends are led respectively by your ego and yourself. So ego is your internal enemy, according to her, and as the self is your friend. So the former, the ego, commands the passions, generating the reign of blind and pretentious selfishness that hallucinates you, turning you into a villain. It is an inheritance of primary animal instincts to be directed, since it is the greatest adversary of the self. So the ego blinds us, hallucinates us, and it comes from our from the primitive world. Remember the staircase? The self is your cosmic individuality, legate of the love of God. Oops, sorry, that impels you to the emotions of love and liberation. Internal sun, it is a flame in the smoke of the ego, waiting for the moment to dispel it in order to shine in fullness. The ego fights and tries to asphyxiate the self. The self is the excellent liberator of the ego. So the self, remember the superego from the Freudian system? The self is the love of God that impels us to the emotions of love and liberation. It is our essence. The ego is kind of a smoke, something that tries to cover the self. Remember what I said in the beginning, that when we are suffering in our stage of evolution, when we are going through a hard time in life, our ego diminishes. And the reason why we open our hearts to God is because when the ego diminishes, as you can see here, we liberate the self. So if humility is the opposite of pride, and pride is a synonym for ego, we have to work on ways to diminish our ego in order to let the self shine, so we can become humble in spirit. So how can we do that? So there is a writer called Eckhart Tolle, and he is a spiritual writer. He has written some books about it, and he gives us some tips on how to diminish, how to dissolve the ego. So according to this author, the ego is the false sense or current state of consciousness of humanity that doesn't let the presence shine through. So he has the same definition as Joana de Angelis has. So according to him, the first step is to recognize the ego. We identify ourselves with our current status, physical appearance, conditions, thoughts, emotions. So ego says, I have, therefore I am. Like I have money, I am rich. I made a mistake, I am a loser. But all these things like status, appearance, they are transitory and they change during lifetime. And suffering usually arises when we seek ourselves in the changing world, in relationships or in experiences. And we have to remember that there is a huge part of us that is unconscious right now. So we are only conscious about this life. So he suggests that we have to pretend that this life is like a playground. Like a sports person has their gear, tactics, strategies for a match, we have our body, our mind, our knowledge as our gear to play in this existence. So we have to realize that these things are just gears. They are not us. They are geared to, and they have a place to play in this existence. But that does not mean that we should identify ourselves with the gears. There is an essence inside of us that is bigger than that. Another thing is to recognize the impersonal nature of mind. everyone in this planet suffers from a dysfunctional mind. It is not only a problem that I face or that you face. Everyone face the same problem because all egos have the same basic structure. So the author says that egos are based on fear, desire, comparison, resistance, they seek conflict, and so on. Egos differ only on the surface. Deep down, they are the same. They have the same structure. For example, most people compare themselves with others using different aspects like looks, nationality, money. The things we use to compare ourselves with others may be different, but the underlying energy is of the ego feeding itself on comparison. So the structure is the same. And once we see the impersonal and dysfunctional nature of mind, we naturally become non-reactive, forgiving, tolerant, and compassionate towards ourselves and also others. Another thing is to watch our mind. So to pay attention to what we think. Because when we do that, we reclaim trapped consciousness from the mind, and more clearly, we see the dysfunction and irrationality of the voice in our head. Watching the thoughts doesn't mean to criticize or to condemn them. It is simply to observe. And if we do that, we will notice that the ego feeds on negativity. Because when we feel sad, anxious, there is something in us that craves for more negative thoughts, emotions, or situation. The author says that ego thinks staying in the state of negativity and unhappiness will get it what it wants. So it is a self-defense mechanism. Another point is disidentifying and transmuting the pain body. So what is this pain body? The pain body is a heaviness in our body which gets triggered by some event or thought or condition that is peculiar and painful to us. So, you know, when sometimes there is a situation or even sometimes I smell or a person that helps to create like a heavy cloud within us, we feel bad, depletes us of energy, inflicts mental, emotional suffering. And then we start thinking extremely in the negative side. And we sometimes, when this pain body, that's what the author says, when it's work, when the pain body gets together with the ego, we can attack people. It's when we lose our mind and lose control of situations. So he says that it is important to us to identify the situations that can cause pain body inside of us. So when in traffic, many situations, when driving a car, sometimes causes us pain body. Just pay attention to the situations, because when we are able to recognize them, this loses energy even before it loses energy, and that alliance between ego and pain body is avoided. So it is an effective practice to catch and witness the pain body before it takes over us. And if by any chance it happens, and we know that the alliance between ego and pain body happens, we have to forgive ourselves and enter the now from there. Offering no resistance, all that arises passes away. Chico Xavier has a phrase that talks about it. So offer no resistance to life is to completely accept the present moment the way it is. So sometimes we are not able to change things. So accept the people that are around us, our habits, good or bad, our physical appearance, our thoughts, our current situation. And another point when offering no resistance is to forgive, because we are all suffering from a dysfunctional mind, remember? So how can we resent someone's illness? Ego is a shadow blocking our self. And because of that, Jesus said, forgive them. They know not what they do. So we are blind here in this planet. Another thing is to be present, because our mind always craves to get away from the present moment. So sometimes when we are having like bad thoughts, or we are thinking about things that we don't want to think, the tip is to switch our mind and to focus in the present moment. And how can we do that? So we can pay attention to our heartbeats. We can pay attention to our breath, and we cannot pay, like now I'm sitting here, so I can pay attention to how my body is touching this chair. So you can try to feel the inner energy within you, like how it flows in your body through your hands. And so that is to focus in the present moment. So after seeing all these ways to dissolve the ego, the author also gives us some practices. What can we do in our daily lives? So the first one is to listen, and listen with our whole body. So when someone is venting or complaining about something, the author says that we shouldn't validate their story by reacting or confirming, like we know, like when we nod, we shouldn't do that, because when people complain, it's the ego complaining through them, because that person's ego wants reaction, validation, to strengthen their illusory sense of self. And if we nod, if we validate the story, we don't give that person space to reflect about what she or he is saying. So we should hold it in a loving embrace, giving always full attention. Another thing is like to write down our recurring negative thoughts, so we can bring them to the light of our consciousness. We can become aware of what is going on in our mind. And if you don't want like to write down, you can use meditation for that, to observe. And we can even count them down like during the day. Another practice is to use our memory to learn and become more aware. So like a player watches himself in a video footage after a game to improve performance, we can use our memory to review mistakes and then to learn from them, so we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. When we detect ourselves resisting to whatever arises, he suggests us to say, I accept, I allow, I forgive, I surrender. And when we cannot accept the situation, we have to accept that we cannot accept that. Watch our egoic reactions. So the reactions that come from our instincts. This is the fun one, in my opinion. So when mind experiences an undesirable stimulus, it reacts. It is a self-defense mechanism. The mind does that because it believes that its reaction will somehow dissolve the undesirable condition, which is a delusion. We know that, like, getting angry, becoming mad won't solve the situation. For example, I have been watching myself for the past weeks because I was studying for the lecture and learning a lot. So I was observing my reactions, my egoic reactions. And a friend of mine sent me a video about a Brazilian singer giving a nice message. However, the guy starts the video showing his middle finger. And when I saw that, I immediately, I closed the video and I thought, oh no, how dare him do that? Is this guy crazy? Like I was offended by his action, by his gesture. So it was a egoic reaction. But then I thought, okay, my friend said that the video has a positive message. I'll trust her. I'll watch the video. And in fact, it had a nice message, but I think the guy was unfortunate to start his video with his middle finger, but that's it. And the author he suggests that even sometimes we have to submit ourselves to humiliation. So when someone diminishes you, when you feel diminished, you do nothing. Don't react, just deal with that feeling, feel what's going on within you. And I don't think we should do that always because it is, it's not easy, it hurts. But sometimes just as a, I don't know, a learning tool, it might be interesting. So because when we are experiencing something that is unpleasant, we usually try to solve the situation. And if we cannot solve the situation, then we have to deal with that. There is no other option. Also, we have to watch for our physical reactions because there are situations that bothers us and situations that bother us, and our body answers to the situation before the mind. So we feel like a tension in our muscles, something in our hearts, and we don't know, we don't realize what is going on. So it is interesting for us to try also to detect these situations. Another point is to free ourselves from all concepts. So to be open through, by its very nature, our thoughts are limited, and they show us a relative truth. We know that true intelligence is holistic, formless, unconditioned. So we don't know the truth. And for example, I like to read comments on the news, footnotes, and sometimes it is kind of sad, but interesting. because people post an opinion about something, and then someone who thinks differently oppose that idea. Until that, I think it is fine. Everyone is allowed to have an opinion. So we hold the relative truth. And this is the beauty of humanity, our differences. We think different. So the problem is when we start to argue, trying to prove our point. Uh, is there is that's the situation where ego is taking control. So we want approval, we want to prove our point. So we when we start on doing that, we should stop, because when we seek the truth, we don't argue, we try to build a consensus. So we try to understand the other person. Why does this person thinks this way? So we try to put ourselves in their shoes. So it's something to pay attention. And the last practice is to meditate. And we don't have like to set a time in the day for that. We can do it throughout the day by, as I said before, paying attention to your breath, to your body, and etc. Joanna de Angelis says, the most difficult battle to be fought takes place in our intimate world. Nobody sees it, applauds it, or censors it. It's yours. Victory or defeat will belong to you in silence. No outside help can contribute to your success, or any situation will lead to failure. And the chapter 7 of the gospel, which is blessed are the poor in spirit, our topic, ends with this topic: mission of the intelligent person on earth, from the Spirit, by the Spirit, Ferdinand. And Ferdinand says that we should never be prideful of what we know or are. If God causes any of us to be born in an ambient where we could develop our intelligence, then it was because he wished us to use it for the benefit of everyone. We have instruments, remember the gears that we have in this life. So we have instruments in our hands which can be used to develop people around us and so conduct them to God. So all the things here are transitory. And to wrap up, there is this quote by Lao Tzu, and he says, "No honor, yet keep humility. Be the valley of the universe. Don't try to be the mountain." So, being the valley of the universe, ever true and resourceful, it is in the valley is where the nutrients are. It is where the crops grow. So then he says, return to the state of the uncarved block. So what is an uncarved block? It is a material that can be used for anything. So, and for example, us, we can lose our jobs. We don't know what's going to happen in our lives. So we can lose jobs. We can lose a member of our family. So if something like that happens, it is because God is waiting for something, or he has something for us. So sometimes we have to take a different path in life. So let's us accept that, and let us be uncarved blocks ready to serve his wishes. So that's the message for today. And thank you, everyone. Have a nice week.